Hello, everyone. My name is Christine, and I'm the host here at the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, the show where we connect your modern life to your Hungarian heritage by building bridges and connecting the circles of Hungarians around us. This podcast is a place where everyone is welcome, where you don't even need to be Hungarian or speak Hungarian to join in on the fun. Each week, we will talk about all the things that we love about Hungary and Hungarian people. So, if you're looking to make that first connection to your Hungarian heritage, or if you're looking to dive deeper, then this is the place to be. Thanks for joining us today. On this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, we will be talking to Willie Geverts, a native New Yorker, a popular YouTuber, Instagrammer, and social media expert who fell in love with Hungary and its people after just one visit. So much so that he decided to move there. Willie has been documenting his love of Hungary and the Hungarian culture by walking around towns and cities in Hungary and talking to the local people, all while recording his journey and experiences and then sharing them on YouTube and Instagram. Previously, Willie's social media handle was Walking with Willie because he was walking and documenting his adventures. Now, it's With Willie, and he will tell us more about that during the episode. Willie Geverts offers a wealth of unique information about Hungary and its people through his walking adventures, and you're sure to learn things about Hungary from Willie that you may not even know that you didn't know. Hello, Willie. Welcome to the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. Let's just jump right in, and why don't you tell the listeners how you found yourself in Hungary the first time?
Yeah, so I visited Hungary for the first time in 2016, and I was back. I was doing my master's degree actually in London at the London School of Economics.
Wow.
And so I came over to visit my buddy Tom Bean, and he was 3 years younger than me. We both played soccer at Middlebury College, the small liberal arts school up in Vermont. I came over here, visited him. We had 6 days. I think we went to like 7 bathhouses in 6 days. I mean, he was a student, so he was just studying and having like his whole spring semester here. I came to visit him and just had a fantastic time. Yeah. And then after that, pretty much I just decided one day I'd like to come back and move here. Right. And then I moved back here 2 years later.
So you've always had this adventure spirit, it seems.
Of course, you have to.
So now tell us a little bit about your Hungarian heritage. What was your experience? Do you have Hungarian heritage? You know, how much did you see growing up or not see?
Actually, I saw zero Hungarian heritage growing up. Okay. And I only found out that I had ancestors that were from the former Felvidék on the border of Poland and Slovakia after I already moved here. Oh, wow. So it was kind of cool. It was like a little bit of sort of a validation of my weird energy and love for Hungary. It was like, oh, maybe I have some ancestors. But, you know, they were from the real border of what is now Lengyelország or Poland, and Magyarország, the Királyság, which was the kingdom. Right. Mm-hmm. And back then you have, and this is another reason why I think a lot of people are discovering that they have this like Hungarian heritage. They're not even sure necessarily what to call it, because back then you had this huge imperial domain that really touched a ton of peoples and borders and nationalities. And of course, before World War I, these distinctions were much more fluid than they are retroactively today. So actually, that's what really attracted me to the idea of rediscovering this heritage, was just the idea that this was a huge swath of Europe that was so integral in the history and was really important when we're talking about the development of the modern nation states and like the romantic identity of the nationalities and folk traditions. And I just was excited to discover more about that. And I think, honestly, my interests will go further than just Hungary alone, although I have like such an intense love for Hungary because of my experiences here and because of my fiance and because of my lived experiences. In terms of like the past, I'm really interested in discovering the makeup and the dynamic of all of these interworking pieces that sort of were in this pre-war world, actually. Right.
So like 2 points to that. So I feel like I've also met people who have discovered like later, like, oh yeah, you know, I think I have some Hungarian heritage, or at least the city that I was born in or my grandparents were born in were formerly part of the Hungarian, the kingdom, and now they're not. And I think a lot of people are in that situation because of the fluid borders between the wars. And I feel like the history part of it is super interesting for a lot of people, because there are so many people that they're like, oh, Hungary, where's that?
You know, like, what is that about? You know, and I feel like all of your YouTube videos and your posts when you're walking around and discovering these small towns and, you know, meeting people, you know, that's exactly for someone who's looking to discover more about their heritage. I feel like your platform is a wealth of knowledge. So tell us about that.
Thank you for saying that. I think that it's actually motivated by the fact that I was looking for more English resources about Hungarian history, and then mixed with the fact that I've always like had this creative energy inside of me, and I've been making videos and I've been writing for, you know, upwards of 5 years now in terms of really publishing stuff and putting it out there.
Right.
But then this sort of YouTube series was definitely born out of the fact that there's just not that much Hungarian specific history in the English language. And Hungarian's obviously a very difficult language to sort of sit through and cipher through, especially if it's done in a way that's not entertaining. So you have a ton of Hungarian in knowledge on the internet. Most of it's in Hungarian, and I find it all entertaining, but I don't think that everybody does. So I was hoping to hopefully make it a little bit more accessible for people.
Well, I feel like you've really done that. And I agree with what you're saying, that, you know, there's so much out there that I guess it's difficult to navigate for most people. And if they're, you know, trying to discover like a little piece of their heritage, they might hit that roadblock and say, you know, and they might move on. But, you know, like your YouTube videos, especially, like there's so many and specific things about the Hungarian culture, which I love, and the towns that you go to. I've been a few times and we've done a lot of touring. So like when I see like the places that you've gone, like I get excited because I'm like, oh, I was there. Like, look at that. And, you know, I feel like the people can really like learn a lot from just that experience alone.
So tell us how the language learning's been going, because you didn't speak any Hungarian when you got there, right?
Yeah, none.
Like zero.
None.
Right.
So I've been here now about 4 years. My first year was really just like self-learning from street signs, reading a lot of things, when I'm out in public, just overhearing a lot of conversation, you know, with my then girlfriend and her friends and stuff, but very passive learning. And then in my second year here, I started to take lessons with a private teacher twice a week. And it was in person at the start. And then after the pandemic, you know, Skype, but now we're just like, you know, really great friends. And our lesson just consists of conversation. At the start, it was more book-based learning. And that really sort of turned the key, because there's a lot of things about Hungarian that I was starting to pick up subconsciously, but you couldn't really understand what they were until you had someone explain it to you. And then the next 2 years, I learned, I think, very quickly, because I spend a lot of time going and putting myself in social situations, like particularly in pubs. And for instance, now I get a lot of practice in the sauna, because you go into the sauna and you have a little bit of like a captive audience, really, because I live 10 minutes down the street from the Leon Falou sauna house, and I go there maybe 5 times a week. And it's like, it's really, you know, every time at least 30 minutes worth of practice. So I love it.
Wow. That's great. I mean, you have like all the immersive experience, you know, like you have your fiance and you're living there and you're going to the bath. So you probably speak very little English when you're there.
Well, yeah, it's a mix, because actually Alexa and I speak mostly in English. So really now we speak a little bit more Hungarian, but our relationship was just built off of English. So that was kind of what we always felt comfortable with. But now it's starting to be a little bit more like Hunglish. But and then with a lot of people, I mean, now that I live in a little bit more of a suburban environment, there's not as much English. In Budapest itself, English is very prevalent, and you really don't need a lick of Hungarian.
Right. And I feel like, you know, rule of thumb, because, you know, my family's traveled a lot, is wherever you go, if you're kind, they will try. And, you know, even my Hungarian teacher was saying that Hungarian people actually love when you try to speak, even if it's like a word, to say hello.
That's,
you know, and then
totally. That's right. That's right. Because honestly, once you can speak a tiny bit, everyone's attitude towards you. I mean, I always had pretty good relationships even before I spoke Hungarian, but just people that you meet in stores and restaurants, on the street, whatnot. That initial icebreaker of trying to speak Hungarian, and it can be literally just 2 words.
Exactly.
It opens a entire like cornucopia of amazing possibilities, and then now that I can actually really speak the language, I mean, I'm really, in the past 2 months, I've gotten like to the point where I'm completely fluent. It kind of just all of a sudden warp speed happened all at once. And now every day becomes this like incredible learning experience for me.
Right. Well, actually, it's funny that like, because I was an English teacher, so like I notice a lot of like verbal things and, you know, things that some people may think are boring, but I have noticed that your Hungarian has really, you're just speaking so much more fluently. So yeah, so I feel like your immersive experience has really.
And also actually the other key element to that, now that you mentioned teaching English, is that I started myself teaching English.
Right.
And I think that was my best, because I'm teaching only Hungarians. And that was my best education, was teaching English to Hungarians.
Yeah.
Because that also helped me understand what the differences were between English and Hungarian, because there's a lot of differences. And I honestly, if you ask me to name some of them right now, I'm not sure that I can even do it.
Right.
But these like little subconscious cues that begin to develop. And it's like, oh, that's why they think that, because you see the students making a certain type of mistake. Correct. And it's because they view the language, so the logic of the language. And that's, I think, the hardest sort of initial stumbling block to Hungarian, and why everyone says it's so hard, it's so hard, it's so hard, is because they're just so, you know, blindsided by this crazy, weird logic of the language. Right. But actually, I think that once you get past and accept the sort of keys to the puzzle, it's not really that difficult. And then, as you mentioned, you're learning you really got the pronunciation down. That's the other main key.
That's super helpful, because I've seen other people in my class who have just as much excitement and or experience, but they didn't really spend a lot of time around Hungarian people growing up. Yeah. So I heard Hungarian from birth, but you know, I'm a little older than you. So like my dad and grandparents came over in 1956. And, you know, that the thought at that point was to Americanize your children.
So I think there were a lot of people in my generation, especially if they only had one parent that was Hungarian, that you generally didn't teach your kid how to speak, which I guess worked to their advantage because they can talk about stuff around us.
Specifically, I have a few things I want to talk to you about. Like, when did you realize, like, wow, making these, you know, formerly known as Walking with Willie, now with Willie, when did you say, oh my gosh, like, this is a thing? Like, what, you know, what was the catalyst for that, you know, for that experience?
Well, I had been my first 2 years here, I'd been making a lot of content on Instagram, just on Instagram. Right. But really, you know, this was back when the My Stories were first becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And I was really putting a lot of effort into mine in terms of editing and spending a lot of time making like music videos and all these different like creative things that I had learned over the years, because I started making videos a couple of years before that. And then once the pandemic hit, everyone sort of got shocked into the state of awareness. And I was like, all right, I got to get my, like, I don't know, I got to do something. I got to do something to really, you know, spend my time on while this is going on. Right. So we were living behind Buda Castle, and for once, all the stuff up by Fisherman's Bastion and all that was completely empty. Wow. So one day I just went out and I took a GoPro that my friend Eddie had given me, and I just made my first like YouTube episode. Right. And I never made any YouTube content before, but that made it feel like a little bit more of a thing that I could put effort into and learn how to do proper editing on the computer rather than the phone and all of that. And then actually, I really enjoyed it. And I got like some initial good feedback. I mean, nothing to the point that it got to a few months later. But at the start, I was just getting a steady increase episode per episode. Like the first episode was just that castle tour. The second one, I went to Roman Aquinkum, or maybe that was the third one. Another one, I did the Honfoglalás around my neighborhood. I made another one that was in the Népliget and about the Tatijáros, and all of a sudden I was learning about this crazy Mongolian 13th century history that I had no idea about. And that was super exciting. And then all of a sudden I got a message from a reporter from 24.hu, which is a very popular Hungarian news site. And they asked to make a video about my video making. And I was like, okay, sure. And it ended up being a lot more like professional and like super produced with like cameramen and everything than I expected. And when it came out on their website, it literally got like 1.5 million views. And like, I think the thing that surprised me the most was on Facebook, 40,000 people shared the video. So they didn't just see the video, but 40,000 people shared the video. And then I realized like, wow, like people are really liking this. And then that month, a lot of other journalists and all that, I think they described it to me as uborka saison, because it's like when there's no real news stories in the summer. And in that first coronavirus summer, another thing I think contributed to this, in Hungary, things were so chill. Like everything was open. The weather was great. We had no cases, no deaths. It was, I don't know if it was even true. I mean, you never know with like the numbers and the statistics, but really at that point when the rest of the world was on fire, Hungary was pretty much normal. And so I started going to all these new places and discovering the country, because the borders were pretty much closed, or I think they were closed, but it allowed and it propagated my initial adventures over those first 2 years to then be taken to the next level and just go all over the country and see how many different diverse places there were. And then from there, like the motivation has just been spurred on because I've gotten more and more support from Hungarians who are finding out about it. And pretty much, I would say, I don't know if I'm just like lucky or something, but 99% positive feedback, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like it was one of those, the stars aligned and you were the right person for the job. You know, like, I don't think it was luck. I feel like, you know, just all of your excitement about things and categories of things, and then all the stars aligned. And I do remember like looking at Instagram and saying, how is it that, you know, clearly this is not like a COVID conversation, but I did notice that things were open. I'm like, how are these restaurants open? And people were kind of living life. And so that, I guess that was a good thing, and that worked to your advantage. So now you're moving on now. So how do you, with so many videos under your belt, I know you have them categorized into seasons now on your YouTube, how do you plan your adventures now? Because clearly you've touched upon so many places and people and experiences. You know, how are you planning on like digging deeper? Like what's your plan for that?
Well, now I've tried to, with my teaching of English, I have private students that I have conversations with, but then I also started doing this thing on Patreon called English with Willie. And that's where I'm really trying to teach English in a very folklore, storytelling, myth, legend, and poetic basis. So really just focusing on the enjoyment of the language and using that as a basis to teach. And that's where I find my biggest thrill is when I find a story of a place that I can visit, or if I can dig deep into a Hungarian story while I'm dissecting it and learning throughout the week, and then find some sort of connection to a physical location. That's when I really feel the energy to go somewhere. And it happens sometimes unexpectedly. Sometimes it's not even for like a direct reason. I mean, I've made an episode for in Kecskemét, and I wanted to make an episode about Katona József and Bank Ban because that was a story that really spoke to me. But then that was easy because Katona József, he was from Kecskemét. They have the Katona József színház. They have everything there. It makes sense. But there's other ones that just sort of happen almost like serendipitously, or while I'm learning about something, I find out, wait, that guy was from there. And that is actually just an hour and a half train ride. And then I can go there and then I explore. And what I find is that all the places that I go, there's always something there. And there's the story that I'm trying to tell to the audience. And then there's also the story that's happening to me while I'm out in the physical environment. So I find that to be like really thrilling, actually. And it's a lot of fun and it's very energizing and motivating.
So another thing that I noticed about a lot of your, two things actually. One is about the thermal baths, and the other thing is about your poetry in your Instagram posts. So let's talk about the thermal baths, because my family loves the thermal baths. We clearly haven't been to as many as you have. You know, last 2 years have been a little crazy, so we haven't done as much travel, obviously. So, but tell me what it is, like how many baths you've been to, some of your experiences, your favorites.
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, or as I mentioned before, actually, my first trip to Budapest, I went to like 7 baths in 6 days. And I think that was the first time I had ever really been to a bathhouse. And it was such an instant, like love for me. And I just wanted to go. Actually, now that I say that, I correct myself, because I started going to like the sauna / bathhouse when I lived in South Africa the year before. That's right. And that's when I started to fall in love with this whole like bathing culture, because it was also, I was a little younger there and I was very frequently hungover, and it was like the best hangover cure in the world. It always made you feel good. Yeah. It just was such a nice
and sweat out all the alcohol.
Yeah. And then when I came to that trip in Budapest, I just really loved once more. And then now finding that Budapest was the city of baths, and the baths are representative of the different cultural and historical eras of the city. And so that's like the Király bath for my first 3 years here was like my home away from home in many ways. I would go there so much and just reflect and think. And that's when I clear up my headspace a lot for time to create things like you mentioned, poetry and stuff like that. As I consider my poetry was my first real creative gift that I found that I didn't know about previously, just started doing it. And it instantly was something that I felt just so inspired by, and people responded to very well. And that was when I really first started my Instagram. Posting adventures was back in England. I was doing my dissertation there. I was traveling all over, and I started posting pictures along with poetry. And every day I would do a new poem. And that was my first like creative itch that I scratched. And from there, I try to infuse a sort of poetic narrative into everything that I do, or I hope to. I mean, it's not always easy.
I love that about a lot of your Instagram posts that you have that in addition to the picture or the story, the video, like you have the poetry there too, which was pretty cool. So which is your favorite bath to go to?
My favorite bath, as I mentioned, was the Király. But unfortunately now Király, which was built originally in the 16th century under the Ottoman era, it's the only bath that closed during COVID that hasn't reopened. Really? And it's very tragic. They claim to be doing some sort of renovations, but sometimes these projects get sort of bent out.
Red tape.
But after that, my favorite bathhouse is Lukács, which is still open. And Lukács is like a smaller version of Széchenyi, which is like Széchenyi is like the big granddaddy bath.
It's the Instagram one, right?
Instagram one, and it's a terrific bath. I mean, I always tell tourists that like they should go there if they can, because it's just like really a spectacular assortment of things. That being said, Széchenyi is a little bit too touristy and marketed and expensive, and it's not it's not like the bathing man or bathing woman's bathhouse.
It's not like your local bathhouse where you're not going to run into tourists. Yeah.
And then the other Budapest baths you have are like Gellert, which is pretty equivalent to Széchenyi, albeit in like this cool Art Nouveau, decadent turn of the century fashion. Yes. And then you also have very local community baths such as Dondad, which is in the 9th district in Ferencváros, right next to the Unicum factory. And that one's like a little bit more rugged and local, and the composite mixture of everyone is probably 90% local, 10%, whereas Széchenyi is more the other way around. But either way, it runs the gamut. Oh, and then Budapest also, Rudas is delightful, because that's also Turkish era, a little bit more of like the pomp of like Széchenyi and Gellert.
Less frequented, because I've been to Széchenyi, I've been to Rudas, I've been to Gellert. I feel like if people are visiting, they generally hit the Gellert or the Széchenyi, because those are the more touristy ones, they're safe, accessible. Not they're all safe, but they're more accessible and talked about. So
definitely. Although Rudas has now, I don't know if they have this when you went, but they have the hot tub on the roof.
Yes.
The Danube, and they've also done a bunch of renovations recently. So now they're sort of in the same price point as the Széchenyi and the Gellert. And then also my favorite thing is that in every town you have a bath pretty much. For instance, I live in Leonfalu, and we have the Leonfalu thermal, which is great. I actually now go to the sauna house more than the thermal, but either way, really, really terrific. And then every single like village, it seems like, has its own bath. And that's something I'm also very interested in from a historical perspective. Is this like, what is Hungary blessed with as a country? Because it's not the terrific coastline like Italy, and it's not beautiful mountains like Austria or Switzerland, but it has one thing that's very special, in addition to like its rivers and other interesting geographic features, is like this crust of thermal water.
Exactly. Everywhere. Exactly.
And it's made it a very like rich agricultural land, and it's made it a very desired territory.
Therapeutic, they advertise that with their therapeutics, which is interesting. Have you ever been out to Lake Havies?
I've been to Havies.
That was an interesting experience. Usually not a lake person, but I did read that every 72 hours, like whatever the underground, it kind of washes through. So, but that was an interesting experience, which was pretty cool.
When I went to Havies, it was the middle of winter. It was January.
Yeah,
and the one thing was that like the lake wasn't that warm. I think it's like better. Maybe it was for you. I don't know. It wasn't as warm as like
we went late December, so it was warm enough.
Yeah. I think it was warm enough for me, maybe not for Alexa, but either it was a really cool place. And then we also went to, what was it called? Bukfurdu, which was up in the northwest of the country around Sopron. That was terrific. I've been to somewhere near Vilan, which now the name of it is escaping me, but that place had like this like crazy smell. The water had this really
like maybe sulfur, like a sulfur.
No, but it wasn't like the normal sulfur. It was like a different type of funk. And that's what's cool actually about the bathhouses is you get these different mineral compositions.
That's for sure.
Actually, it's a whole study. There's called balneology, which is a whole like historical sort of study that was, it's still alive and well today, but back in the 19th century and the 18th century, balneology like reigned king all over Europe because all of these traveling like European artists and sort of high elites or whatever would go to the different bath towns around Europe and take cures and take medicinal cures.
Absolutely. Well, even like look at, Bath in England. It's a similar,
that's cool.
Romans love their baths. I've been there. They said you could drink the water. I tried it, but I survived evidently. So. But I feel like the baths are definitely a huge attraction. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that about Hungary, that it's not just, there's not just one, there's multitudes of baths and just along the countryside. I remember growing up, my grandmother told me a story because she's from Heves County and I forgot the name of, there's a bath and kind of like in the hills and the mountains where they discovered it because a young boy was walking through the hills and he kind of fell in. And then they discovered this whole underground thermal situation. Like there's a lot of really cool bath situations that if people are visiting, they should definitely try. You can't get to them all in one trip. Evidently you did 7 your first time. So I think that's a record, which is pretty cool.
I when I like something, I do it a lot. And I really love the baths.
That's awesome. I feel like, you could do like a whole series on the bath.
One thing that's interesting though with the bathhouses that's true is that it's something that I think I would like to do more behind the scenes because I've done some stuff in bathhouses before with the videotaping and everything. And it is a little bit like invasive in the public atmosphere. And I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, but I think from like a photographic angle, I would love to and a journalist, I would like to do like a book of like my favorite bathhouses all around the world. Actually, that would be like the dream copy date book to write one day.
I think that's a great topic. I think there's a lot of history, not just the fact that they're baths, but who occupied the baths during the wars. Is that a topic?
All right, good.
I read about it as well. Idea. Yeah.
This is a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm definitely going to do an episode on the baths too. So stay tuned.
If you want, you can call me in as like a consultant on the bathhouse.
Absolutely. I'm all about it. My family loves it. My husband, he's not Hungarian, but he loves Hungary and he loves the baths and So funny first story, when the first time we had gone there, I don't know, a while ago, I was explaining to him that there were thermal baths. And he's like, well, do they heat them? I'm like, no, they're geothermal. And he believes everything I say, but I think he was kind of double checking. So we were with a little tour guide one day doing something else, and we were just chatting in the car. He's like, so the thermal baths, like, do they heat them up? And she's like, no, that they have to cool them down actually, because they're so hot. I was like, see, I told you. So let's talk more about you. You've done all this walking around. Now you're moving on to the English with Willie, which is a newer adventure. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what made you think of that? As far as how you set it up, your Patreon. Tell us a little bit more how people could maybe get involved with that if they're interested.
Yeah, so I was doing originally Walking with Willie was the name that I came up with for the YouTube channel. And then that sort of morphed into my Instagram personality as well, which was previously just my name, Willie Geverts. I think at one point I made it into Willie TV. And then I went, okay, Walking with Willie because of the YouTube success and everything. And then afterwards, I was like, I felt a little bit limited by this whole idea that my whole creative online persona was based around the walking adventures.
Right.
Not that that was a bad thing, but I wanted to do more and I really wanted to teach.
Right.
And then I figured if I just, not that all this branding and marketing is even that important, but just in my head, it helped coalesce a lot of things. So
yeah, you don't want to be limited to one thing.
Yeah, if I shorten my name and my persona online to With Willie, then I can do anything with Willie. Absolutely. Because I was already making a podcast called Talking with Willie. I was doing English with Willie, Walking with Willie. And so I just wanted to be able to like pretty much collaborate with people, whether it's in like a student-teacher relationship or in an interview-based relationship or on this thing or that thing. And anyone can do something with me if they want to. Sure. And one of the things that I'm doing now is the English. And for me, English teaching has always been like something that I wanted to do, but not necessarily in the formal way of going through the school system and all of that. Honestly, I'm so amazed and admire the teachers that do that. I don't think that it right now at this point in my life coalesces with my personality. So I wanted to have this impulse to teach and also combine it with my creative talents that I've gained through all this constant video making and adventure tourism and writing and this thing and that thing. And so English is just, for me, such a universal educational experience because anything can be taught with English. You can teach history with English. You can teach biology with English. You can teach anything with English. And if it's an interesting topic, that's the way that people can learn, is because they're interested in reading more. So, I sit here sometimes at night and I just read Hungarian poetry. I don't know what it means, but I enjoy it. And so I do it, and constant practice in an environment where you can actually enjoy something, I think is like the key to learning language. I
think that is the key. And as a former English teacher, I can tell you that my students were definitely more engaged when you're teaching them something where there's a little bit of an excitement with it, because learning a language because you have to isn't as exciting than like learning a language when there's like a folk tale or fairy tale like you do with the English with Willie.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of like your student experiences. Like how are they? I'm sure they're enjoying the class, but like tell me about like their experience. Like what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing that the community is really building around the people that have been engaged with the English with Willie over the months as I've been developing it. And now we have a really powerful and small community, and it's nice to get to know everybody and be able to talk with them. And I'm wondering how some of that's going to work if I'm scaling this up, because I have hopes to be able to teach like really, an endless amount of people.
Absolutely.
But I think that's really something that I want to maintain and not have things grow too quickly, because it's nice to be able to actually connect and feel that the education is like, and see how it's being used. And then also on top of that, I also teach private online English to people. Right. And so that's where some of my students are in both programs. Some of them are just doing the private classes, but that's where I've really seen a lot of improvement. And I can really, after a period of 3 months, be like, wow, that person is speaking much better English. Right. And that's like a great source of validation for me. And I can see how they feel more confident when they're talking. And I think that's a key to really moving forward with your English and moving forward with any language is to feel confident, because that's what we all want at the end of the day, is to be able to confidently express ourselves and be able to communicate.
Well, I think also too, like you have a very scintillating personality. So you exude confidence. Yeah. Former English teacher, you exude personality and confidence. So I'm sure that you're connecting them to that. You're making them feel inspired and, validated, even if they make mistakes along the way. You're not coming down on them like the Hollywood type of English teacher in a movie. You're inspiring them, and you're.
Oh no! Well, I learned from my grandfather. He was a teacher of teachers.
Oh wow!
Teacher of teachers of physical education at Brooklyn College.
Oh, wow!
And he was like all about just like inspirational, positive affirmation, and how that is so powerful in a learning experience. And I really find that it is, as long as it's not fake. I mean, you have to know also how to be honest with a student and tell them what they're doing wrong and how they can correct it. But I think that it's much more powerful if you can tell them that in a way that still maintains their positive energy.
Right. Well, because you're not tearing them down. You're building them up.
Yeah. And I guess everyone responds differently to different types of communication. And it's also another thing that's different is when you're doing online teaching versus in-person teaching. Because like the in-person teaching is really amazing. For instance, now I'm teaching my fiance's mother, and she is a real beginner. Okay. But we met over the period of the past 4 weeks, and that's like the biggest improvement I've seen of anyone. Wow. And that's just been amazing. And for her, I don't charge her. She makes me a really nice breakfast.
She cooks you, I imagine.
Yeah.
Food,
it's great.
Right?
Actually, it's the best deal. Yeah. And then sometimes she lets me take her car and I go make a video. So those are like amazing Saturdays.
That's fantastic. So tell us, there was one thing that you had written in an Instagram post that kind of hit home with me. You said, maybe I was meant to be here. It was when you, I guess, were first over there. I don't know if your grandmother had sent you something, some type of document about some ancestors. Yeah, you're like, maybe I was meant to be here. And that hit home with me because I feel like I'm currently a citizen now. Not that that's the topic. And like my kids are. And when we go there, my son especially, he's like, I just feel like I belong here. And so tell me, like, when you said that, I feel like I was meant to be here. Like, what inspired you to say that?
I think it was just, it's one of many stories that could have been written about my life, but this one just felt like it was something that made sense to me. And it's just, I feel like we're all writing our own stories, and there's an infinite amount of possibilities that exist. And some of them they feel destined, and some of them don't feel destined. Actually, though, if you look at faith in destiny as a concept, from a philosophical perspective, you're destined to do what you are doing because that's the only. And I think that's something that I missed in my education when I was learning about all these religious faiths that were based around like predestination, let's say. Right. And it seemed sort of nonsensical to me because how could something be predestined? But actually, if you take a step back and you think about it, predestination is just the idea that what you're doing is what you were meant to be doing. Right. And I'm the least, well, I wouldn't say I'm the least religious person, but I'm not really associated with any organized religion. Right. That's something that I feel like always got maybe a little bit of a bad rap because philosophically, predestination is like you are where you are at a given time. And I don't know. Anyway, I got a little bit sidetracked there as I tend to do sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, I really felt comfortable here. Like your son said, the idea that there was a place that just sort of liked me for who I was, which I, to be honest, never really had a hard time with in most of the places that I've been. But it was just something different about being in this context of the Hungarians and not and me wanting to really be able to like express myself, and them also like helping me along the journey has been very really cool. I made a lot of great friends. And then obviously Alexa's the biggest piece of that puzzle because that's really what I attribute a lot of this passion and interest in Hungary to is just my love for her. And that's given me this desire to want to understand her better. And as we grow old together, hopefully that we can just continue that communication. And so understanding where she comes from and who she is very important for me as well.
Well, that's amazing. I feel like you have so much to offer, especially for people who are really looking to make that connection to that maybe little piece of Hungarian heritage that they recently discovered, cleaning out, someone's house. Like, I'm Hungarian. I need to know more. And I feel like you're the man to do that. I feel like you have all of categories on your YouTube and your Instagram. I think you're a great leap forward for a lot of people who want to learn more about their heritage.
Is really what I think the peoples are. I mean, we talk about these borders and these nations and these states, but it's really the shared language and the shared ability to communicate that defines groups.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just, learning about all the groups and feeling connected and learning about it and feeling included. And there are so many groups of Hungarians actually around the world that, are excited to continue to maintain that piece of heritage that, they came from. And I think that your platform is definitely a place for them to get started if they need to get started, but also like continue with their learning because, one of the last points I wanted to ask you about is that I imagine that like even younger people, and when I say younger people, I already told you how old I was, but younger people that may have already, say, finished school, but, they're a little more technologically advanced than people older than me, because I'm pretty tech. Mm-hmm. They probably are learning a lot about their own culture, even as Hungarians living in Hungary, because you're presenting it in a digital format. So Have you come across anything like that where people say, oh, I didn't really even know that about my own country? Did you have any of those experiences?
Yeah, well, that happens to me all the time in Hungary. They all make fun of me that I know more. Well, I guess they're really praising me. It's not making fun of me, but
absolutely.
It's sort of like you know more about the country than I do. And I try to tell them, well, I also spend like my entire day reading books about it, for better or for worse. But either way, the excitement is definitely really cool as well when I can share something about Hungary to a Hungarian, because that's something, you say that everyone's so enthusiastic about being Hungarian, or the majority of the people, but I think the expats are potentially sometimes more enthusiastic than the actual Hungarians that live here. And that's not universal, by the way, because there's plenty of Hungarians that live here and love Hungary through the roof, but there is, particularly around like this sort of teenage and 20s generation, sometimes a little bit of, I don't know, not necessarily contentment with how the whole situation is going in Hungary. So that, or you hear a lot of times people always talk about the history as like tragic or something. But then I always try to frame the Hungarian historical experience as just like really what I got from this book that I read about Hungary that inspired a lot of this was The Will to Survive. And it was by this British diplomat who was also a historian who studied the Hungarian language. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but it's a great book. They have it in a lot of the bookstores, The Will to Survive. And that framed the Hungarian experience not as one of like diminishment, which people sometimes see, especially in the wake of things like the Treaty of Trianon, but rather as one of survival and of strength and of like miraculous survival. So that's what is really cool, is I feel like Hungary is this like perpetual underdog story that actually has just this amazing, rich and romantic history along the way.
Well said. I couldn't agree more. I agree. So what is it that you want to leave the listeners with? Obviously, I'm going to include all of your socials in the show notes. What do you want to leave them with? What do you want them to know about with Willie?
Well, I just want them to know that I'm very grateful for the experience to be able to hopefully inspire and educate people, because that's really all that I feel motivated to do with my life, is to try to help a lot of people and to do a lot of, hopefully, things that make people happy and inspired, and go out there and really spread on their own energy. Because I think that's how, especially right now, seasonally, as we come out of winter and into spring and into summer, that's sort of what we always need more of every year when we're coming into this transition period. As we start to get into this new phase, they start to spread that energy to others, and that energy spreads to others. And I really think that this can become a positive moment for humanity as we enter the rest of what I was told we're going to be the Roaring 20s. So I'm ready.
I'm excited for that. I definitely want to spend more time in Hungary, though, during these Roaring 20s. I know we'll see each other, so I look forward to that. I do. And I think I want to leave everybody with what you said about lifting people up. I feel like that's the goal of this podcast, is to lift people up and definitely make them feel included. And I think everything about what you're doing helps with that. So I appreciate that you were here today. And I look forward to a lot more conversations. I really appreciate it, Willie.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining me today on this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. Don't forget to check the show notes for information about this episode and how you can connect with Willie Geverts on all of his social media platforms. If you're enjoying the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, be sure to sign up for the email list on our website at thehungarianheritagepodcast.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Hungarian Heritage Podcast. That way, you will never miss an upcoming episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, or you would like to reach me at the podcast, send me an email at Hungarianheritagepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You'll find all the ways to connect with the podcast in the show notes below. Thanks to my audio editor, Tori Irvin, for working her audio magic on this episode. Our theme music is Hungarian Dance by Pony Music, used with a special license from Envato Market. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts so we can continue to connect our modern lives with our Hungarian heritage. Until next time, goodbye everyone. Sziasztok mindenkinek!